The morning of my sister Rebecca's wedding, I watched her brush her hair by the window for the last time. She was 20 years old. The light was soft and gray, the kind we get in Lancaster County in late November, and her hair was so long it nearly touched the back of her chair. She was humming. I remember that. She was humming a hymn from the Ausbund, and her hands were steady, and she looked at me in the small mirror on her dresser, and she smiled. 4 hours later, 300 guests were sitting on hard wooden benches in our front room waiting for her, and Rebecca was gone. Her wedding dress was still hanging on the back of the door. Her prayer cap was still folded on the bed. Her shoes were still lined up neatly underneath, and my sister had vanished into the cold November morning without saying a single word to anyone. I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where I share the stories my community would never let me tell out loud. If you want to hear the truth about Amish life from someone who actually lived it, please hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I post these every week, and the bell is the only way YouTube actually tells you when I do. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and tell me this. Have you ever had someone disappear from your life with no explanation? I read every comment, and your stories matter to me more than you know. I was 9 years old the day Rebecca disappeared, November of 1962. I'm 71 now, and for 62 years I have carried this story without knowing the ending. 62 years of wondering. 62 years of my mother's silence at the kitchen table. 62 years of my father's jaw tightening every time her name came up, until eventually her name stopped coming up at all. In my community, when something painful happened, you didn't talk about it. You absorbed it into the work. You kneaded it into the bread. You stitched it into the quilts. You buried it under the rhythm of milking and planting and praying, and you kept moving. That was faithfulness. That was what a good Amish family did. But a child doesn't forget. A 9-year-old girl who watched her older sister hum a hymn at the window on the morning of her wedding doesn't forget. Let me take you back to that morning, because the details still come back to me like it was yesterday. We had been preparing for weeks. An Amish wedding in Lancaster County in 1962 was an enormous undertaking. 300 guests, roast chicken for every one of them, mashed potatoes, gravy, celery dishes lined up the length of the table, because celery at an Amish wedding meant prosperity, meant a real marriage, meant the family had planned far enough ahead to grow it. My mother and aunts had been cooking for 3 days. My father and uncles had cleaned out the barn, set up the benches, scrubbed the floors until the wood gleamed. The groom was a young man named Jonas Baylor. He was 23. He had a 100-acre farm waiting for him from his uncle, and on paper he was exactly the kind of match every Amish father prayed for. Quiet, hard-working, baptized into the church the spring before. The kind of man who would never give a woman trouble. That's what my parents said. That's what everyone said. Rebecca had been courting him for almost a year. She had ridden home with him from the Sunday singings since the previous spring. He had sat in our front room on Sunday evenings, drinking coffee my mother poured, talking with my father about cattle prices and the weather. The Ordnung, the unwritten rules of our community, said that once a courtship reached this stage, marriage was the only honorable outcome. There was no breaking it off without scandal, without whispers, without your family's name being quietly damaged for a generation. But here is what I noticed even at 9 years old, and what I have thought about every day of my life since. Rebecca did not look at Jonas the way the other girls in our district looked at the boys they were going to marry. She looked through him. Her eyes would fix on a point somewhere over his shoulder, and her smile would arrive a half-second too late, like she had to remember to put it on her face. I remember once, the summer before, I asked her if she loved him. We were snapping beans on the back porch. She didn't answer me for a long time. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, "Love is something you grow into, Hannah. That's what Ma'am says." And she went back to snapping the beans, and I knew, even at 8 years old, I knew that was not an answer. If anything in this story has stayed with you so far, I want you to do me a quick favor. Hit that like button. It tells YouTube these stories matter, and it helps other women who grew up like I did find this channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And turn on the notification bell. There's so much more of this story coming, and I don't want you to miss it. The morning of the wedding, my mother sent me upstairs with a cup of peppermint tea for Rebecca. The house was already filling with the smell of roasting chicken and coffee. I climbed the narrow stairs holding the cup carefully so I wouldn't spill it on the wooden steps, and I knocked on her door and she called out, "Come in, Hannah." She was sitting at her dresser in her white nightgown, brushing her hair. The wedding dress was hanging on the door, plain blue, the way Amish wedding dresses are. No lace, no veil, no ornament of any kind. Just the dress she would wear that day and then on every communion Sunday for the rest of her life, and finally in her coffin when the time came. That was the tradition. One dress for 3 sacred occasions. I set the tea on the dresser. She thanked me. She kept brushing her hair. And then she looked at me in the mirror and she said something I have turned over in my mind for 62 years. She said, "Oh, Hannah, promise me something. Promise me you will never marry a man you don't know. Promise me you will know him all the way down before you stand in front of the bishop." I was 9 years old. I didn't understand what she meant. I said, "I promise, Becca." She smiled. She turned and kissed the top of my head, and she said, "Go help, ma'am." That was the last thing my sister ever said to me. I went downstairs. I helped my mother with the celery. The guests began to arrive in their black buggies, the horses steaming in the cold morning air. The bishop arrived. Jonas arrived in his black wedding suit, his hair freshly cut, his hat held in his hands. The benches filled. My father took his place. The singing began, slow and somber the way Amish singing is, the men's voices low and the women's voices threading above. And upstairs, my mother went to fetch Rebecca. I remember her footsteps on the stairs. I remember the silence that followed. I remember her coming back down, her face the color of bread dough, and whispering something to my father. And my father standing up so quickly, his bench scraped against the floor. Rebecca was gone. Her dress on the door, her cap on the bed, her shoes underneath. The window in her bedroom was open just slightly, and the morning air was moving the curtain, and that was all there was. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. The men searched the barn, the fields, the pond, the woods behind the property. The bishop sent word to the neighboring farms. By noon, 300 guests had eaten the wedding meal, in near total silence, and gone home. By evening, my mother had folded the wedding dress into a chest in the attic, and we never spoke of it again. Or rather, My family never spoke of it. The community spoke of it for years. The whispers traveled the way. Whispers always travel in Amish country. Sideways, never directly. In the quiet space between one woman and another at a quilting bee. In a single sentence dropped at a barn raising. Some said Rebecca had run off with an Englishman. Some said she had lost her mind. Some said, and these were the cruelest ones, that she had been touched by the devil. Jonas Baylor married another girl from a neighboring district 18 months later. He never spoke Rebecca's name in public again, and my parents, who had loved her, who had raised her, who had taught her to read the Bible and bake bread and stitch a quilt, lived the rest of their lives with a silence between them, where their oldest daughter used to be. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you are listening to this and thinking about someone in your own family who disappeared, who was cut out, whose name stopped being spoken. If that's you, please leave a comment and tell me their name. Sometimes saying a name out loud, even on a YouTube comment, is the beginning of something. And if this story is moving you, please subscribe, hit that like button, and turn on the notification bell, because next week I'm going to tell you what I found, and you don't want to miss it. Let me keep going. I left the Amish at 24. I was shunned. My letters were returned. My mother died in 1991 without ever speaking to me again. My father followed her 3 years later. I built a life on the outside. I learned to drive. I learned to use a computer. I went to community college at 46 and got a degree in social work. I married a kind man named Thomas, who is not Amish, and we had 2 daughters, and I told them everything I could about the world I came from, including the story of the aunt they would never meet, the aunt who disappeared, the aunt whose dress was folded into a chest in an attic that I would never see again. And then, 3 years ago, when I was 68 years old, my younger daughter Sarah did something I had never thought to do. She put Rebecca's name into one of those genealogy websites, the kind where you upload your DNA and it finds people. And one Sunday afternoon she called me, and her voice was shaking, and she said, Mom, I think I found her." There was a woman in Ohio, 78 years old. Her name was Ruth, not Rebecca, but the date of birth was right, and the DNA match said she was my full sister. My daughter had already sent her a message. The woman had already responded. She wanted to talk to me. She had been waiting, she said, for 60 years. I sat in my kitchen and I cried for an hour before I could pick up the phone. Her voice on the other end was older than I remembered. Of course it was, but it was hers. And the first thing she said to me was, "Hannah, did you keep the promise?" And I knew. I knew exactly which promise she meant. The promise I had made at 9 years old at her dresser on the morning of her wedding. "Promise me you will never marry a man you don't know." I told her I had, and then she told me everything. Jonas Baylor, the quiet, hard-working man with the 100-acre farm, had not been quiet at all behind closed doors. During their courtship, on the bundling nights when he came to her bedroom, and her parents slept down the hall, he had not stayed on top of the quilt. He had not respected the rules. He had pushed past every line she tried to draw, and when she had tried to tell him no, he had told her that she was already promised to him in the eyes of God, and that what was happening between them was already her duty as his future wife. She had tried to tell her mother. Her mother had told her that good Amish girls did not speak of such things, and that marriage would settle it. She had tried to tell the bishop's wife. The bishop's wife had told her to pray. 2 weeks before the wedding, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. And she knew, because she was an Amish girl who had been raised on the Ordnung and on the fear of God and on the absolute certainty that a woman's body belonged to her husband and to the church. She knew that if she stayed, her entire life would be Jonas Baylor. Every night for the rest of her life would be what those bundling nights had been. And the child she was carrying would grow up watching it happen. So on the morning of her wedding, she opened the window. She climbed down the trellis my father had built for my mother's climbing roses. She walked 4 miles in the cold to a phone shanty at the edge of the district, and she called the only English person she knew, a woman who ran a fabric store in town who had always been kind to her. That woman drove her to a bus station. Rebecca had $11 in her apron pocket. She rode that bus to Cleveland, Ohio. She gave birth to a daughter the following May. She named her Hannah after me. She raised that daughter alone, working in a diner, and she never came back. She never called. She never wrote, because she knew that if she made contact, my parents would find her, and the bishop would come, and the pressure to return would crush her, and the daughter she had run to protect would grow up inside the very thing she had run from. She told me all of this on the phone in a single afternoon. My niece Hannah, who is 63 now, was sitting beside her holding her hand. Rebecca, my sister Becca, lived 62 years on the outside and never married again. She raised her daughter. She worked. She read books from the public library, hundreds of them, the way only someone who had her education ended at 8th grade can read books. She told me she had thought of me every single day. She had a photograph of me in her wallet, a school photograph my mother had sent before the wedding, and she had carried it for 62 years. If you've made it this far, I need to ask you something. Please subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button and turn on the notification bell. These stories take me a long time to tell, and the only way I know they're reaching the people who need them is if you do those 3 things. It's free. It takes 5 seconds, and it means everything to me. I flew to Ohio the next month. I was 68. She was 78. And we sat across from each other at her kitchen table and held each other's hands and cried until there were no more tears left. My niece made us coffee. My great-nieces and great-nephews came over, 6 of them, all grown, all carrying pieces of my sister in their faces, in their laughs, in the way they tilted their heads when they listened. Rebecca lived another 18 months after that first phone call. We saw each other 4 more times. We talked on the phone every Sunday afternoon. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 2023 with her daughter beside her, and I was on the phone listening to her breathe at the end. I am 71 years old. I have carried this story for 62 years, and now I know the ending. And here is what I want to say to anyone who is listening. The Amish world I grew up in told me that obedience was the highest virtue, that a woman's body belonged to her husband, and that a husband was chosen for life by the time you were 20 years old. That silence was modesty, and that pain was something you offered up to God. My sister Rebecca was not allowed to say what was happening to her. She was not allowed to refuse a marriage that had already been announced. She was not allowed to be afraid out loud. So she did the only thing the system had not thought to forbid. She climbed out a window 62 years later, I understand that what looked like a disappearance was actually a rescue. She did not abandon us. She saved her own life, and she saved her daughter's life, and she paid for it with 62 years of silence. If you grew up in a world where someone vanished and was never spoken of again, I see you. There is almost always a reason. The silence was almost never theirs. It was the system's. If this story moved you, please leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me about the person in your family no one is allowed to talk about. And please, if you haven't yet, subscribe to Hannah, the Amish girl. Hit that like button and turn on the notification bell, because there is so much more I have to tell you. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. And if you ever find yourself standing at a window with a closed door behind you, remember my sister Rebecca. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is climb.